don't know, Roger Ver was the very first investor in the Bitcoin ecosystem way back in 2011, I believe, and he's the current CEO of Bitcoin.com. Roger, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate having you here.
Thank you, Aaron.
So I figured we would jump off of that first investor bit to begin with, because you really have been a part of the Bitcoin and crypto ecosystem pretty much since the beginning, and 8 years have elapsed since you first started investing in it. So I was wondering just what your perspective is on how the space has changed, both in terms of the technology, but also in terms of the overall community of the crypto space.
Yeah, it's changed a lot. So back 8 years ago, I wasn't only the first investor, I was basically the only investor, and there wasn't much of an ecosystem at all. So like, one example of just how far the whole ecosystem has come is way back then, I think it was 2012 at this point, I reached out to a website called blockchain.info, which now is probably known by more people as blockchain.com. But I reached out to them and I said, like, hey, like, I'm interested in this Bitcoin thing. Like, do you need any money to expand what you're doing? I like what you're up to. And like, they had maybe, 10, maybe 30,000 users or something at that point, whereas now they're over 30 million users. And the guy replied to me, he said, oh yeah, currently we're running the entire website on a Mac Mini at home from in my bedroom, living in my mom's house. I think we should probably buy a real server, so we need some money for that. So I was like, sure, no problem. We worked out a deal, and I gave him money to buy the first server and, expand it from there. But that just shows, now blockchain.com is one of the, premier businesses in the entire ecosystem, whereas back when I made my investment there, it was like literally running on a Mac Mini in this guy's bedroom at home, living with his parents. So, what a world of difference it's been in just 8 years. And I guess one other really, really big difference is the philosophy within the ecosystem. In the earliest days, everybody involved in Bitcoin, like 99% of people that were involved, they were involved because they wanted to see a separation of money and state. They wanted to see people have choice as to what sort of money they get to use and have control over money. We want to see competition in the marketplace of money. So just like you see better quality products between car manufacturers competing with each other and hamburger manufacturers and drink manufacturers, all the competition always leads to a better quality product at a lower price. Well, the same is true of currencies. So like, there's been some competition between like the dollar and the euro and the yen and this and that, but like only certain people are allowed to compete against those guys. Whereas suddenly now with the invention of cryptocurrency, anybody can go head-to-head and compete with the dollar for market share in the use case of money, because these cryptocurrencies can't be shut down or turned off or stopped short of turning off the entire internet and the entire world. So we're seeing very, very quickly now the options that people have in terms of what sort of money to use. They're blossoming, right? You have all sorts of choices now for things that work, much, much, much better than methods that we'd had available to us previously. And basically, in the earliest days, it was all just a whole bunch of libertarians that were super, super excited about this separation of money and state. Whereas now, there's still a lot of libertarians involved, of course, but now there's a lot of people that just kind of see the space like, hey, I can make money really, really quickly without having to do much work. And anybody that stands in my way of that, I'm going to attack them. And that's kind of disappointing for me, because if you study economics, you realize that the more economic freedom the world has, the faster the rate of economic growth the entire world has. And economic growth is what makes everybody, have this highest standard of living as we do. So we should be doing everything we possibly can to increase the rate of economic growth around the world. And I think bringing permissionless peer-to-peer cash for the world is an absolutely amazing tool to bring more economic growth to the world. But I think in the earliest days, like, everybody was on board with that vision, and everybody was like, yeah, let's do this. Let's bring peer-to-peer cash for the world that anybody can use and do whatever they want. And like, literally we're going to liberate the entire world's economy this way. And today you don't hear nearly as much of that from the people that are new to Bitcoin. And you even hear some people actually grumbling about that, like, oh my God, these people are trying to do things without permission from other people. And if you go back to the early Bitcoin community, that was the entire point of Bitcoin. And Bitcoin used to be the only cryptocurrency. Now there's thousands of cryptocurrencies, and a lot of people accuse me of attacking Bitcoin. I have no problem with Bitcoin whatsoever. I'm a fan of absolutely anything that works. The BTC version of Bitcoin stopped working at the end of 2017. It was over $50 per transaction fees for an average transaction, and I myself, running a business in the space, was paying thousands of dollars in fees per one single transaction over and over and over again. And at that point, I knew it was absolutely broken. And the part that really made me lose faith in it was when there were a bunch of people cheering about how this is fantastic, the fees are so high, hooray, hooray, hooray. So, myself, well, I started using things other than BTC version of Bitcoin, and being the owner of Bitcoin.com, our options are kind of limited. So it was BTC or BCH were the main two options. So BCH it was. So we're busy promoting Bitcoin Cash every day at Bitcoin.com right now because it actually works for cash reliably month after month, year after year. But I'm a fan of anything that works. If it works permissionlessly for people to send and receive money anywhere in the world, I like it.
Roger, I definitely want to dive more into Bitcoin Cash and the philosophy side of it because I know you have a lot to say there. But one thing that struck me in what you just said is, the fact that you weren't just the first, you were at that time the only investor in this space, right? If you could even call it a space. So I wonder, as you've seen more money flow into the space, right, and more investors join the ranks, what's your take on whether that additional capital that's now available to people in the space is a net positive thing or a net bad thing? Just what are the nuances of that now that there's so much more money to be had in the offering?
I think it's definitely a net positive thing, and there's so much more attention and developers and stuff happening in the ecosystem as a whole. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter which cryptocurrency winds up being the dominant one, so long as it's a cryptocurrency that actually puts people in charge of their own money and their own destiny. And if it's some cryptocurrency in which every transaction is monitored and controlled and spied upon by the NSA and whoever else, that's a horrible thing for the world. But if it's a cryptocurrency in which individuals have control of their own money and privacy over their own money, that's a fantastic thing. And I'm working towards the version in which people have control and privacy over their own money, not the state-issued spy coin. And we'll see which one wins out at the end.
Fair enough. So it's clear from reading your tweets and the things that you write and just speaking with you for even a couple minutes here that it almost seems like it's impossible for you to speak about Bitcoin and the crypto space without going into the philosophical side of it, especially the political philosophy and your views on things like voluntarism, right? So I'm certainly interested in hearing more about your particular views there, but I'm also wondering, as more people and stakeholders have joined the space, right, do you believe that no matter why they come to the space, and let's set aside the question of mere speculators for the moment, right? Do you think there are legitimate reasons to be interested in the space that don't have to do with that kind of political philosophy? Or do you think that really, once you're down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, it's going to at some point arrive at questions of politics and philosophy?
Sure. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being involved in something that's not for political reasons or philosophical reasons. Nothing wrong with that at all. But for me, that's what has me so excited about cryptocurrencies is the ability to empower the individual to have more control over their own lives. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have been interested in it at all. I wouldn't have gotten involved at all. And it was really, really interesting. In the early days, in 2011, 12, 13, pretty much everybody was a voluntarist, right? And for those that are watching this that don't know what a voluntarist is, it's very simple. It's the idea that all human interactions should be on a voluntary basis or not at all. And that's pretty much how everybody lives all their day-to-day life every day. Starbucks asks people to buy their coffee. They never force people to buy their coffee. You asked me to do an interview with you. You didn't threaten me to do this interview with you. Everybody deals with everybody on a voluntary basis all the time, with the only exceptions being, robbers, rapists, murderers, and governments. And we should stop and think for ourselves. Well, if it's wrong for, a robber to use, coercion against somebody to engage in a non-voluntary interaction with him, and it's wrong for murderers, and it's wrong for rapists, why does government get to do something that's wrong for anybody else to do in any other situation anywhere? And for the answer for voluntarists is, well, it's not okay when they do it either. And in the early days, pretty much all the people that were involved in Bitcoin were of that philosophical mindset. And we got involved in Bitcoin because we already had that philosophical mindset. But now it's so fun. Pretty much daily I get contacted by people saying that they had never heard of voluntarism or any of these ideas before. They found Bitcoin. And because they found Bitcoin, they were then exposed to the ideas of voluntarism. And now they're like, I see the world so differently now and so much more clearly now. And it just, makes me smile from ear to ear when I hear about people finding out about the ideas of voluntarism and the benefits of free markets because they found Bitcoin. Whereas I found Bitcoin because I was already interested in free markets and voluntarism. So I guess it goes both ways.
interesting perspective. Yeah, I actually studied philosophy in college, so it warms my heart and makes me smile ear to ear when people are encouraged to study philosophy at all. And in that similar vein, to go to another kind of philosophical question, one thing that I'd love to pick your brain on is just the nature of the debates that happen in the crypto space quite broadly, but also specifically, it seems like, especially in the last maybe year and a half, there have been a lot of discussions about things like what constitutes the true Bitcoin, or what names we ought to call which communities and which blockchains, and things like this. So I'm just wondering, in the first place, what do you think is the best way to go about those debates, given that it seems like there's something that people feel is worthwhile discussing there, but oftentimes it also feels like it can devolve pretty quickly into shouting matches, at least in my perspective on it, right? And then to get your own philosophical stance on it, what do you think constitutes like the true Bitcoin, if that's even a meaningful question to be asking?
Yeah, so I kind of defer to you on the philosophical side there, but I would assume that, first principles, if this can be considered a first principle here, is allow people to actually have the discussions and have the free and open dialogue and debate about what makes something Bitcoin, how do you define Bitcoin? And sadly, that dialogue and debate has been absolutely shut down on the main discussion platforms for cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, so it wasn't allowed to take place. And from my point of view, is if you're busy censoring one side of the debate, you've already lost the debate. But I kind of see, what's the true Bitcoin? There's BCH and BTC and now BSV and a couple of other ones. I guess I kind of see it like ice cream, right? Like they're all ice cream, and then you have different flavors of ice cream. So like, is chocolate ice cream? Of course. Is vanilla ice cream? Of course. And so like, I guess you could make a claim that BTC is Bitcoin, BCH is Bitcoin, and even BSV is Bitcoin, and they're all just different flavors of Bitcoin. But at the end of the day, like, Vitalik made this argument, and, Vitalik is a genius, and he was absolutely right on this, and I think I've been a little too focused in not paying attention to the big picture. Like, at the end of the day, what makes Bitcoin valuable isn't that it's Bitcoin. It's the inherent characteristics that make Bitcoin useful as money and useful in commerce that make it valuable. And so whatever cryptocurrency has those characteristics intrinsically that, and I don't even know if intrinsically is the right way to describe it, but yeah, it has to have certain characteristics: fast, cheap, reliable, easy to store, easy to recognize, not counterfeitable, fungible. It has to have these characteristics. That naturally makes it useful as money. And if something has those characteristics, it'll start to be used as money. And the main thing that the BTC version or flavor of the ice cream of Bitcoin has going for it is it has this giant network effect still. Even though the transactions are slow and expensive to use, this giant network effect makes it incredibly useful still. And the other flavors of Bitcoin still have to catch up in terms of that network effect. But Bitcoin Cash transactions are super fast, cheap, and reliable, and will continue to be so. And so in the long term, I think that's a much, much stronger value proposition than the BTC flavor of Bitcoin, in which they're saying they openly say the transactions should be slow, expensive, and unreliable, and you shouldn't even use it as money. You should just use credit cards instead. Long term, I don't think that that's the right strategy to wind up becoming a peer-to-peer cash for the world. But I think Bitcoin Cash has that, fully within its target there.
Roger, do you think, to go along with this wonderful ice cream analogy that you've established, there's some value in asking what the original creator of ice cream intended, or rather do you feel that the functionality comes first, and even if flavor of Bitcoin needs to diverge from the letter of what was said in, let's say, the white paper or Nakamoto's forum post or things like this, as long as it's functional, it doesn't really matter if it diverges?
I think the reason the fighting is so bitter over the Bitcoin name is because the branding is incredibly important. If I walked up to people on the street and said, hey, do you want to buy some ice cream? I'd probably have some success selling ice cream because everybody knows what ice cream is. Whereas if I walked up to people on the street and said, hey, you want to buy some frozen cream, sugary, sweetened water? They'd kind of look at me and say, I'm not so sure about that. And it's the same with Bitcoin at this point. Everybody in the world is like, a large percentage of the world's population has heard of Bitcoin, and they think they know what it is. And if you tell them, hey, you want to try out using Bitcoin? Like, yeah, maybe I'll give that a try. I've heard about that. Whereas if you tell them, hey, you want to try using, Even something, if you tell me you want to try using Zcash, they'll be like, I don't know what Zcash is. Like, nah, I don't need any. And I think it's kind of similar, though. Even though if you look at like Zcash, I think it has characteristics that make it really, really awesome money. The thing that it's lacking or falling behind all the flavors of Bitcoin at this point is the name recognition and the network effect. It doesn't have as many exchanges or merchants or wallets, and it doesn't have the name recognition from the Joe on the street. Just like if you ask me, hey, you want some ice cream? Sure, I'll have some ice cream. You want some sugary, frozen, creamy water I froze in my freezer? Nah, I'm good, bro. I think it's what they'd say. And we're seeing the exact same thing in the cryptocurrency space. So, like, the name and recognition is so important. And so that's why the question I think is somewhat important. Like, what did the original creator of Bitcoin have in mind? Well, I think it was pretty clear. He had in mind a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It's right there in the very title of the white paper he released. And the fact that the BTC version of Bitcoin today isn't even trying to be a peer-to-peer electronic cash version, and they mock people who want to use it as cash, I think that's a pretty good indication that the BTC is not Bitcoin, or it certainly isn't the Bitcoin described in the white paper, even though so many people around the world are still busy referring to it as Bitcoin today, which is a bit frustrating for people like myself or anybody that was involved in the space early on, because it doesn't have the characteristics that made Bitcoin popular to begin with, and it doesn't have the characteristics that was described in the original Bitcoin white paper, yet everybody's still busy calling it Bitcoin and busy attacking people that call something that actually is similar to what was outlined in the white paper. Anybody that calls that thing Bitcoin, people get attacked at this point. So I guess that brings us to where we're at today.
Going back to what you said about kind of the main forums and places in which Bitcoin conversations happen, right, and kind of having issues with conversations getting off the ground in the first place. One thing that strikes me as really interesting is that you, as you said earlier, are an avid reader of economics, right? If you go to your personal site, you have book recommendations for people, which is awesome. Personally speaking, as I guess a Luddite now, as books are going out of style, but much more in style, right, is something like Twitter, where you command a really large following and tweet on basically a daily basis, right? So I wonder, given that you clearly appreciate the value of long-form content like books, right? What do you see as maybe the struggles with communicating in really short-form social media content, especially when the matters at hand are as complicated as something like cryptocurrency, right? And how do you approach using those more mainstream methods of communication in advocating for Bitcoin?
Yeah, pretty clearly Twitter is not the right platform for long-form communication. But I think the even bigger problem there at this point is it's really, really hard to know who's real on the internet, or who's even a human on the internet, or who's actually saying their real opinion versus who's just trying to cause FUD on the internet. And so most people won't have been around at this point. So, like, people are aware now that there's lots of Twitter bots on Twitter promoting, different crypto coin ICOs and this and that, and you have to be careful which ones are real and which ones not. But there's lots of other ones that are doing all sorts of stuff, and it's hard to figure out, who's real and what's just trying to be manipulative. But this isn't something that's new to the crypto coin space. So I remember in June of 2011, right? So this is ancient history in Bitcoin land, and this is back when there weren't any other altcoins. It was only Bitcoin. And in June of 2011, the price of Bitcoin in the course of just a couple of weeks ran up from like $2 or $3 a Bitcoin to $30 a Bitcoin. So it went up 10x in like 2 weeks, right? And there were these wonderful, wonderful forums at the time over at bitcointalk.org. And everybody was busy discussing Bitcoin there every day. And when the market was calm and there wasn't a lot happening, like really, long form, in-depth, wonderful conversations where you could learn from really smart people and exchange ideas with all sorts of really smart people all over the internet, and the forum wasn't so busy where it wasn't just an avalanche of stuff. You could actually read all the posts each day and keep up with what was going on. And suddenly, when this was the very first time ever in the history of Bitcoin, it started to it got some worldwide media attention, and lots of people were looking into it. All of a sudden, some switch flipped on the forum there, and the forum was absolutely overrun with bots that were just posting nonsense and made the forum completely unusable. And they're saying, buy, sell, buy low, sell high. And it was just absolute nonsense, like non-human reply. It was just a bunch of bots, and they flooded the entire forum, and they succeeded in shutting down any sort of in-depth, long-form discussion from being able to take place because they just flooded the forum with thousands of posts and made it unusable. And so the powers that be, or whoever it was that was behind that, since June of 2011, were keeping a really close eye on Bitcoin. And the instant people really needed to be able to have some in-depth, long-form conversations, they shut it down. That was way back in June of 2011 it's been happening. And then the same thing happened on our Bitcoin on Reddit, the most popular discussion platform for the entire world. I was just looking at a link where you can see all the things that are deleted from there last night as I was going to bed. And it was somewhere in the ballpark of like 50% of all the posts were getting deleted from there today. And it's been going on for like 4 years now. I invite anybody to Google Bitcoin censorship, and there's a fantastic article called Bitcoin censorship by John Block. It's the guy's name, which is a hat tip to the American historical figure of John Locke, right? And so John Block wrote this amazing article you can read about the censorship going on in the Bitcoin community, and you read it and your jaw will just drop and you'll just be amazed that this sort of thing is going on and being allowed to continue to go on to this very day. And it's really, really frustrating as a proponent of the free and open exchange of ideas and free speech. And if people are saying things that you think are wrong on the internet, the solution to that is more people being allowed to correct those wrong ideas and say the truth. But instead, we've had the exact opposite happen within the Bitcoin community, and that's been really, I guess, heartbreaking for me to see that happen. And then anybody that studies psychology, like monkey see, monkey do is a real thing, and that's exactly what they tried to do within the cryptocurrency community. They tried to have only one narrative be what everybody else is allowed to say, and anybody that says anything different has their post deleted. And so all the people that have come to cryptocurrency over the last couple of years, they've only been allowed to hear one single narrative. And then, monkey see, monkey do. They hear everybody saying one thing, they say it too. And then there's just one more voice to the choir of misinformation at this point is the fact of the matter. And I've done everything I possibly can to try and spread the truth and talk about what happened. But there's a lot of monkey see, monkey doers out there that are attacking me for saying the absolute truth out there. And it's frustrating and sad. But I invite anybody out there, don't be a monkey see, monkey do. Go and look at the actual evidence for yourself and look at what's happened, and Google Bitcoin censorship so you can see what's happened out there and think for yourself. And I guess that's good advice in any area of life is think for yourself. Have use the mind that you have. That's what you have it for, to critically think and evaluate the evidence before you.
Absolutely, great life advice. I love that. So, I mean, there may be many bots on the internet now, right? But you are clearly not one. And like you said, you've done a lot of work in trying to advocate for Bitcoin throughout basically any place in the internet where it's being discussed, right? Which is interesting to me, quite generally, but especially with you, the notion of such a public figure in a community that, as you said, especially in the beginning, valued things like decentralized communities and anonymity and things like this. So I'm just wondering, how do you adjudicate that very public role you have in the space, both in your professional and your personal lives?
So before Bitcoin, I was doing everything I could to keep a very private life and not be a public figure in any way whatsoever. I was still funding some libertarian things, but when I would fund them, I told them, don't give my name, don't give me any credit, just here's some money and start, spread these ideas of voluntarism, and you can do it with my money, but I don't want any attention from it, because governments love to attack people that spread the truth. And I look at what's happened to Julian Assange, or look what's happened to Edward Snowden, and don't be surprised if governments don't come and attack me for spreading the message of, hey, you don't need a bunch of politicians to rule your life. You should rule your own life. Be your own president. You don't need another president out there. And but Bitcoin was just such a powerful tool to bring more economic freedom to the world that it's useful to have a spokesperson, to have a public figure that's not some shadowy figure. And it kind of wound up turning out to be me. So for better or worse, privacy in life is really, really wonderful to have, and I don't have so much of that anymore. But at the end of the day, if I wind up bringing more economic freedom to the world, which I already have to a large extent, but there's a whole lot more work to be done and a whole lot more economic freedom to be brought, then I guess the fact that I lost my privacy will be worth it, because other people will have theirs, and maybe I'll get it back someday. Maybe I can just drift back into the, I'll be a Wikipedia page about some historical figure, but not active in public life anymore.
Someday, right? I mean, it is wild to think about just how much has happened in such a short period of time. You have plenty of life left to live, clearly. Roger, I want to be respectful of your time because I know that this was scheduled to go for 30 minutes. We have a lot more questions for you.
We can go for a bit longer. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Just let me know how you're doing on time and we can cut it whenever.
Sure.
But moving on from that then, that's actually a great transition too, as you talk about maybe sliding out of the public eye eventually, because one of the other things I was wondering about was your opinion on Satoshi, and namely his decision to ultimately, well, his or her, their decision to ultimately leave the project, right? And I'm wondering what your thoughts on that there are. Do you think that it was a good thing that they left? Do you think that it was a bad thing? How do you think it impacted the community?
I think what an amazing fairy tale story, right? It's a mystery. Everybody loves a mystery. So who is Satoshi? Where did he go? I remember in the early days on the the Bitcoin.Talk.org forum, people were discussing they were talking about how finally when humans managed to make contact with aliens, we don't have to be embarrassed about the type of money we're using anymore because of the invention of Bitcoin. And I thought that's pretty true because, we've been using little round pieces of metal for thousands of years. That's pretty low-tech stuff. So we should be kind of embarrassed about that if we ever did make contact with space aliens. Whereas now with Bitcoin, we don't have to be embarrassed about the type of money we're using anymore, which I thought was great. And everybody was, some extra out there, people were speculating, well, maybe Satoshi was a space alien, right? Maybe this is their way of contacting us. And I don't think that's the case, but it was really fun seeing people speculate about Satoshi. Who the heck is this? Was he AI? And there was another fantastic thread on there that was talking about, is Bitcoin the world's very first artificial life form? And if you think about it, Bitcoin, it's consuming resources, right? It's harnessing all of us humans to go around and set up more machinery to help support this Bitcoin life form, and it's consuming all this electricity, and it's growing, and it's expanding, and it's getting all these people to help it do its thing. And if you look at it as if it's a life form, a really strong argument can be made, and it's reproducing, and it's going on, and it's spreading, and Bitcoin's the world's first synthetic life form was this other really just interesting discussion platform out there, and Satoshi created the world's first synthetic life form? Wow, what an interesting, exciting way of looking at it. And a strong argument could be made that that's the case. So I think, to answer your question, I think it was really, really helpful to have Satoshi be this mysterious figure because everybody loves a mystery and they start talking about it and then they start pondering about it and they tell their friends about it. So it was a really, really fantastic way for Bitcoin to spread because it had this mysterious creator and figure there. And then it was also super useful that it had, spokespeople to go out there and help spread it as well. And in the earliest days, it was, mainly a bunch of libertarians, but now it's, Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, was, on Joe Rogan's podcast promoting Bitcoin a couple of days ago. What a powerful platform to spread this to more people. So it's great to have public faces, but it's also fun to have these mysterious, shadowy figures. And I think the Dread Pirate Roberts was a huge part of that too. People are wondering, what type of person is running this website? And in the early days, for anybody that was around, the Silk Road was this amazing, amazing platform. It was the first platform that showed that Bitcoin could be usable as money beyond the purview of the state's control. And it was because I heard about the Silk Road for the first time. I wasn't interested in drugs myself, but I thought, well, what the heck money are they using on this website? This must be amazing money. And it was because of the Silk Road that I Googled Bitcoin and started looking into Bitcoin.
I love that point about people loving mystery because when I was first learning about Bitcoin, it was actually through this book, Digital Gold, that you may know, and easily the most interesting part of that book to me was the exact thing that you said, which is the mystery of, who is Satoshi, who is Dread Pirate Roberts, all of those things.
Yeah.
So that definitely resonates. I have some more technical questions now from you, hopefully not to give you any whiplash. Like I said, my background's in philosophy, but some other members of the S-Folks team are really interested in the more technical details of Bitcoin Cash and just your views on crypto, more technically speaking. So one of the things that you've said in the past, right, and I hope I'm not misquoting you here, is that there shouldn't be a block size limit on Bitcoin because miners wouldn't create a block that's too large to validate since it would be against their interest to do so. Is that something you still believe or not, and why?
I'm pretty sympathetic to that argument, and I think the argument that I would make today is that we don't know what the correct block size is, right? Nobody knows what the correct block size is. And so the market participants as a whole should be what determine that block size limit. And just like we don't know what the price of a cup of coffee should be, nobody knows. And the price of a cup of coffee is different in different places, right? So like the size of a block that can be produced maybe in North America maybe is different than the size of a block that can be produced, in mainland China behind the Great Firewall of China. We don't know. The people producing the blocks need to be the ones that decide that, and the market as a whole should be what decides that. And we've seen that happen, right? There is a limit imposed on the amount of block space that could be made on the Bitcoin blockchain. Well, the market found a way to solve that, and now there's thousands of other blockchains with block space in them, and people are deciding which block space and which blockchain they want to buy block space in, and that's kind of a tongue twister, but I think I got the point across.
You absolutely did. In a similar vein, and maybe also tying into your views on the rights of the individual, I'll leave that to you. Do you feel that individuals, like an ordinary person like me, should always be able to personally validate a blockchain for themselves all the way from its genesis block, or do you not think that's an important feature of a blockchain?
No, I don't think that's an important feature. I think the important feature is that individuals have access to uncensorable peer-to-peer cash. And the technological means to achieve that are not as important as the actual product that the end user gets to use. And even if you read the original, Bitcoin white paper, the plan from Satoshi for day one was that the only people that would be running full nodes would be miners and big giant, data centers. It wouldn't be your home user at all. And so the fact that there's this mentality now that anybody should be able to run a full node on a Raspberry Pi, that's in direct contradiction to the original roadmap for Bitcoin. And if you want to, use a blockchain that, you can validate the entire thing on your Raspberry Pi at home, like that's fine, more power to you, but you shouldn't have crippled the original Bitcoin that was on path to become money for the entire world, that had a roadmap saying like, hey, the miners are going to be running big data centers and anybody will be able to use it using SPV wallets and light clients. They turned that roadmap upside down on its head, yet still want to call it Bitcoin and get mad at anybody who wanted to go down the original path for Bitcoin. It seems kind of strange that would be the case, but that's where we're at. So
do you worry that if we reach a point where an individual can't easily operate a full node at all, it's just beyond their purview, would Bitcoin somehow become less peer-to-peer in that case, or do you think it would still be just as peer-to-peer as it is today?
I think it's just as peer-to-peer today. So like I'm using Bitcoin Cash now every day, all day. I have wallets on my phone. I have wallets on my computer. I rarely use a full node wallet. I'm busy using the SPV wallets and wallets that all the wallets I use, I control the private keys myself. Like I think that's the important part, is if the user has the private keys, that's what counts. Like you can publish your transaction to the blockchain a million different ways as long as you have your private keys that you can sign the transactions with. And being able to control private keys, that doesn't require expensive hardware at all. And at the end of the day, like running a fully validating node, so what? You validated the transactions. You don't have the ability to put any new transactions in the blockchain. It's only the miners that are able to do that. So I think the mining nodes are the ones that actually count.
Got it. Makes sense. Do you think that Bitcoin gets stronger from the attacks that happen on it all the time, or are those something that endangers its integrity?
I'm not sure, to be honest. One thing that's really frustrating for me, my goal from 8 years ago when I got involved in Bitcoin, my goal was to spread Bitcoin adoption as fast as we possibly could, so that so many people were using it for every purchase, everywhere in their daily life, all the time, that it would be too late for the politicians to figure out what had happened and that they had lost control of the ability to issue money that people actually want to use. And it would be too late for them to pass a bunch of laws to control it. Governments move slowly and the market can move faster, but unfortunately we lost years and years and years of adoption because of this stupid scaling debate. And now all the politicians are really busy passing laws and trying to figure out how to control cryptocurrency and to control the market and do that sort of thing. It's really really frustrating and disappointing to see that have happened, but that's where we're at today.
Got it. The next question comes from a different member of our team, more a piece of trivia than anything else, I think, but this person was looking on whois.com, which is all about domain registration, right, and noticed that bitcoin.com was actually registered on January 4th, 2008, which was 10 months before the Bitcoin white paper was published, right, and 8 months before bitcoin.org was registered. Do you have a sense of how that came to be, or an explanation?
I wish I did, but no, unfortunately, I don't. I know who I bought it from, and there's an NDA there, so I can't really go into too many details, but I'm sure the person I bought it from was not Satoshi. It's just a really, really astute investor and a good guy, and another really, really early Bitcoin adopter, of course. But one interesting thing I do have that's related to that, so I also bought blockchain.com. I bought that domain name in, I don't know, 2011 or 2012 or something like that. It's been a long time now. I have no idea who I bought that domain name from, and it was one of the strangest transactions I've ever made, ever. It was absolutely, totally bizarre. I offered to pay for the entire thing in advance in Bitcoin, and the seller insisted on still using an escrow, even though, like, if I'm paying in advance in Bitcoin, they have no risk. But anyhow, the whole thing was really, really, really bizarre. And if anything, that one's much more closely related to the mystery of Satoshi, but I don't know who I even bought it from. It was I think probably the strangest transaction of my entire life. It took months for something that should have taken an afternoon. So it was really, really bizarre.
So we've covered a whole other area of mystery in the crypto ecosystem, the mystery of domain name registration. Yeah. I like that.
And blockchain.com seems like a domain name that maybe Satoshi would have had as well. I don't know.
It would be high on my list if I were this. Switching gears a little bit again. So one issue that has been on the top of people's minds for, again, maybe the last year and a half, certainly since Bitcoin Cash came into existence, is this issue of hard forks, right, that split one blockchain into two. Right, and it seems like at least I can conceive and work in my mind the sense that it could be a positive or a negative thing for communities, right? In the sense of empowering people who maybe have a different view of how the blockchain ought to be to go off and do that, but also running the risk of fragmenting communities, which might be dangerous to the ecosystem, especially when it is still so young, right? So given that you were pretty involved in the first Bitcoin Cash fork, from BTC, and now the split between BCH and BSV. I was just wondering what your views on that are. Do you think that hard forks are a net good thing, a net bad thing? What lessons, if any, should we take from the ones that have happened in recent time?
I think they're definitely a net good thing, but they can be bad things too, right? So it just depends on the situation. So I think not ever being willing to hard fork ever is a disaster, as we've seen with BTC, right? They claim that we can't hard fork because it'll split the community and we have to do this SegWit thing and this and that. And if you look, so all their arguments were like, we can't split the community by having a hard fork, so we're only going to have soft forks. And look at what the result was. They shattered the Bitcoin community into 2,001 different altcoins at this point because they refused to hard fork. So the BCH most recent hard fork where it split into BSV and BCH, that was definitely an issue, right? But we saw with BTC, not hard forking ever. That was an issue too. That's what made all these altcoins start to get traction. So I think it depends on the time or the place. Whereas, Zcash and Monero and a bunch of these other coins, they've had dozens of hard forks and no problem at all. And Bitcoin Cash had a couple of hard forks also previously that they weren't any problem whatsoever. And I think there'll be more hard forks on Bitcoin Cash that wind up not being any problem whatsoever. So it just kind of depends. Just like a car, right? A car can be a wonderful tool for transportation and can do all sorts of great things to bring you and products, places around the world. But a car can also be used to, mow down a bunch of people on bridges in London, right? And that's a giant problem too. So hard forks can be good and bad depending on the situation and how they're used.
So maybe to push on that a little further, it sounds like you're saying, though, that there are no maybe hard and fast rules or guidelines for when it might be a good idea versus a bad idea. You have to take it sort of purely based on any individual situation. Is that your view?
I think the libertarian in me says people should be free to fork off anytime they want, and the nice part about that is everybody gets the version of that cryptocurrency that they want after the fork, and more choices generally are a good thing than less choices. So.
Sure. Digging more into the history of BCH specifically, some members of the team were wondering if there's any code change of any kind that stands out to you in past memory that you really didn't agree with or that you argued against that ultimately ended up making its way into the blockchain's code.
No, I've never really argued much about code changes at all, since I'm not a software developer, but I've made really, really, really strong arguments against changes to the economic code mainly it was the BTC version of Bitcoin. So even one that happened a long time ago is they added this thing called replace by fee, where it then made it so that you couldn't safely make certain transactions instantly on Bitcoin. So Bitcoin transactions went from being instantly acceptable to no longer instantly acceptable in a safe way. And so I made really, really strong arguments against that. And then, of course, I made arguments against the block size production quota that was imposed. And those weren't software engineering arguments. Those were economic arguments. So, like, if something is working and working really, really well, don't change it. And that's exactly what happened to BTC. It was working incredibly well and getting adoption all over the world. And they took that economic code that was working incredibly well and they completely turned it upside down. And now we've seen BTC adoption is literally reversed. You had businesses that used to accept Bitcoin stop accepting Bitcoin. And that's the first time that's ever happened in the entire history of Bitcoin. And we saw also, and from the time the blocks became full, the first time ever in the entire history of Bitcoin that the number of daily transactions and the amount of commerce happening on Bitcoin declined for the first time ever in the entire history of Bitcoin. That had never, ever, ever happened before, ever. And that's as a direct result of them changing the economic code that had made Bitcoin a success. If you change the economic code of something that was working and working well, don't be surprised when it stops working. And that's exactly what happened on the BTC version of Bitcoin.
Roger, I want to talk for just a minute about Bitcoin Cash versus Litecoin, right? Because while they're certainly very different blockchains that take different approaches in many regards, right? They do aim at the same goal of frictionless peer-to-peer cash, right? And I think a lot of people, even if they weren't familiar with the ins and outs of the coins beforehand, are thinking about them comparatively ever since that really great debate you had with Charlie Lee last year. I want to say in October. So one of the things that I'm wondering about specifically is I think it's really interesting that Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin have these very different origin stories, right? Where Litecoin was essentially a clone of Bitcoin with a few minor tweaks, but it was not launched from the Bitcoin blockchain itself, right? Whereas Bitcoin Cash was a fork off of the actual Bitcoin blockchain, right? And so I'm wondering, from your view, do you think that those different origin stories have influenced the ways that they've developed and the differences now that we see in their communities?
And there's definitely a huge difference in the communities there. And your question is does the different origin reflect the current community? And yeah, probably. I think on the Bitcoin Cash chain, you have the early Bitcoin adopters, the people that wanted peer-to-peer cash for the world. And I'm not deep in the Litecoin community at all, but as an outsider looking in on it, I kind of don't know what their goal is so much, but credit to Charlie, the creator of Litecoin, for being a really, really effective marketer of saying, hey, we need to limit the Bitcoin block size. But if the blocks ever become full on Litecoin, we'll just increase the block size on Litecoin. And so basically, Charlie told the Bitcoin community that they should change their working economic formula, and Litecoin should keep the same working economic formula that made Bitcoin successful to begin with. And sure enough, here we are today. Litecoin is, a top 10 crypto coin in the world, and BTC no longer has its winning economic formula. From a marketing perspective for Charlie, or a strategy for getting Litecoin adoption, great job. For somebody that worked so hard to make Bitcoin peer-to-peer cash for the world, to see it undermined in such a sneaky way, it's incredibly frustrating for me. And I think a lot of Bitcoin Cash people feel that way towards Charlie and his basically advocating suicide for the economic code of Bitcoin that was successful, while at the exact same time advocating that exact same economic code be applied to Litecoin. So he said that Litecoin should use Bitcoin's original winning economic code, and Bitcoin should change its winning economic code to something that hadn't been tried before. And people like me were saying was going to be a disaster, and turned out to be a disaster. That's pretty frustrating to have watched all that happen.
I'm wondering, Roger, I'm thinking out loud, so excuse me while I find the best way to put this, but I wonder personally whether, right, when we get these public figures, right, someone like Charlie Lee, or really anyone else who holds influence over a blockchain, right? Do you worry at all that the very kind of freedom and decentralized aspects of blockchain technology that are so appealing to so many people also lead to potentially lack of accountability for the de facto leaders of the community when they say things or do certain things that, for example, as you feel with Charlie in that instance, were sort of morally underhanded?
I don't know. The internet seems to be a pretty good tool for holding people accountable for different things. So mobs can, appear pretty quickly on the internet to hold people accountable. But then other things like hopefully it's online somewhere because so Charlie on this cruise, I don't know, last year sometime, he gave, a half an hour presentation on stage. And I don't know if it's been put online, but it needs to be, because he literally spent a half an hour advocating Karl Marx's labor theory of value, which for anybody that studied any economics at all, you realize is just absolutely laughable. Basically, the same argument would be if you spend an hour making mud pies and spend an hour making apple pies, the apple pies and mud pies are worth the same because an hour worth of labor went into both. And he spent a half an hour up on stage making that argument in regards to Bitcoin, that Bitcoin's valuable because it takes a bunch of labor to make them. And it just shows Charlie has absolutely no understanding of the economic reasons that Bitcoin became successful to begin with. The fact, I felt embarrassed for him to be up there on stage, droning on and on about something that he had absolutely no understanding of. And it's okay not to have an understanding of something, but you shouldn't be giving speeches about something you have no clue about. You should go and spend some time reading some books so you can educate yourself about it. So the fact that Charlie, in the year 2018, at that point, was busy still advocating for Karl Marx's labor theory of value shows that the economic code of Bitcoin isn't where Charlie's understanding lies. So we shouldn't be taking advice from him on that front. Yet that's exactly what he's been advocating on the Bitcoin chain. And I think I probably veered off track from whatever your original question was there, but that's where my thought process led me.
No, that's okay. That's helpful. I think it's germane to what I was asking about. To end on maybe a more forward-looking note, Roger, as you look ahead in what's left of this new year, since unbelievably it's already February, what do you see as the greatest challenges for crypto generally, but also specifically Bitcoin Cash? And then on the other side of it, what are you most excited about in the coming year?
What am I most excited about? I think I'm more excited about the adoption coming to people to be able to use cryptocurrencies in commerce without having to get permission from anybody. To me, that's a really, really exciting tool to bring more economic freedom to the world. And more economic freedom means more economic growth, and more economic growth means the faster we'll have spaceships going to Mars and doing all sorts of who knows what amazing stuff. And so that's exciting for me. And man, the years tick by fast. As you said, it's already February of 2019. 8 years of my life are gone that I've spent, devoted to promoting cryptocurrencies. I had 0 gray hairs when I started promoting cryptocurrency. Now, my hair is short, but I definitely have a few gray hairs coming in on the sides here. So, what's next? I hope more adoption for the world and more economic freedom for the world, and that's what I'll keep working towards.
What about the challenges? What do you think the biggest challenges we'll face are in 2019?
I think the biggest challenges are we need the politicians and regulators to get the heck out of the way of the entrepreneurs who are going to entrepreneur and make the world a better place. So the biggest challenges are dealing with the politicians, sadly. But I hope to build the tools to make it so that the politicians no longer have control over people and people will have control over their own lives.
Things are about to change.